Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu wa sallam mubarak ala nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. So welcome to another installment of the Monday meeting and the resumption of our commentary on Kitab at-Tawheed lil Imam al-Mujaddid Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. And before starting the lecture, there's one housekeeping item. Next week, next Monday, which is the 30th of May, we will not have class. Unfortunately, I'll be out of town that day and I will not be able to make it. And so we'll have 1 week vacation and then we'll resume the following Monday, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So again, for all those concerned, next Monday, the 30th, we will not have class. So today we'll be looking at the 5th chapter in Kitab at-Tawheed, and that is the chapter that Al-Imam al-Mujaddid has entitled Babu ad-Da'watu lit-Tawheed, the chapter regarding the invitation or the call, Babu ad-Da'wati ila shahadati an la ilaha illallah, the invitation or the call to testifying that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah. And so here we notice, as the Imam did in the other chapters, he continues this practice of scaffolding in these introductory chapters where he's laying the foundation for the work, and he orders the chapters, or continues ordering the chapters, in sensibly progressive stages. So the first chapter, he established wujub at-Tawheed al-Ayan, or al-Jami' al-Ayan. He established that at-Tawheed, observing it, practicing it, applying it, is obligatory upon everyone, from mankind and jinnkind. Then he follows that up with a chapter where he highlights the virtues of at-Tawheed. Babu Fadl Tawheed wa ma yukaffir min al-dhunub, the chapter in which he highlights the virtues, the merits, the excellence of Tawheed and all of the sins it expiates. Then he follows that with a chapter which he entitled Babu man haqqa Tawheed dakhal al-jannata bila hisaban bighayri adhabin wala hisab. So he follows that up with a chapter in which he said, or he basically encouraged us to be exceedingly committed to a Tawheed, not to just suffice ourselves with the bare minimum of a Tawheed, but to go above and beyond, because if we do that, we'll be entitled to enter paradise without punishment or without reckoning. And then after that, he follows it up with a chapter which he entitled Babul Khawf min al-Shirk, the chapter of being afraid of the opposite of a Tawheed, which is a shirk, and that is because a Tawheed is not complete without avoiding a shirk. So now he follows all of that after explaining that we have to practice a Tawheed, and then encouraging us to practice it by telling us what the virtues are, then encouraging us not to just be the people who practice it at its bare minimum, but go above and beyond. And then he tells us to be afraid of a shirk. Once he's prepared us in this way, he follows up with a chapter where he tells us that we're obligated, once we know about this Tawheed and know its virtue and its merit, and we realize we have to be afraid of its opposite, we have an obligation to call others to embrace this Tawheed. And we have to understand that when we call people to Islam, we have to make our priority in calling them to Islam the call or inviting them to what? To this Tawheed, and explaining to them this Tawheed. And this makes perfect sense, because as the Imam has clarified in those previous chapters, Tawheed is the first and foremost obligation. It's the number one thing we're obligated to do. It's the first thing we'll be asked about when we enter the graves, right? Also, it is the most virtuous deed, and we saw that in the narrations where the man came on the Day of Judgment, and he had 99 scrolls of sins as far as the eye could see, and he had one bitaqa, one card, not even an entire scroll of deeds, but one bitaqa with one good deed. And that was his commitment to a Tawheed and confessing sincerely the oneness of Allah, and how that outweighed what? all of those sins, most virtuous deed. And we also learned that falling prey to its opposite, shirk, is the only unforgivable sin, and it nullifies all the good deeds. And so when people are going to be called to Islam, the first thing they should be called to is this. The first thing they should be made to understand is this. Why? Because without this, none of the other deeds will what? Will matter. They'll all come to naught. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ أُوحِيَ إِلَيْكَ وَإِلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ لَإِنْ أَشْرَكْتَ لَيَحْبَطَنَّ عَمَلُكَ وَلَتَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. He says, it has indeed, certainly it has been revealed to you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as it was revealed to those who came before you, that if you associate partners with Allah in your worship, if you don't practice at-Tawheed, if you violate this Tawheed, لَيَحْبَطَنَّ عَمَلُكَ, all of your good deeds will be rendered what? Null and void. So you could be the person who, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, you could be the person who's the most avid offerer of prayer, the most avid prayer at night, the most avid faster during the daytime. You could be the person who gives the most charity. If you do all of these good deeds, but you don't have a Tawheed, those deeds will be what? They'll be null and void. And so obviously, when we call people to Allah, we should call them to this thing that's going to make their deeds acceptable, whatever deeds they do after that. Wa alaikum salam. And it would be wrong for us to put the cart before the horse and begin telling people about hijab, telling people about veiling. We've seen those examples where sisters may come to the mosque to learn about Islam, and the first thing they're told is, ultimately you're going to have to cover your face, right? And let's just say that the sister accepted that, left the lecture and never came back again, and thought that Islam was confined to what? Covering her face. And no doubt, covering the face is a good deed, right? It's the way of the wives of the prophets. But if that's all a person knew, and while they were doing that, they were committing a shirk, that would avail them nothing. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that a woman understood a Tawheed and never really understood covering. Never really understood, never wrapped her head around it, but understood a Tawheed and observed it and was committed to it. She could go to where? She could go to paradise. But if the opposite were the case, knew only the veil and didn't know Tawheed, couldn't go to paradise. And so it's very important for us to understand the sensibility of what the Imam is laying out here now, after letting us know the importance of this Tawheed, why it's so important, so critically important, why it's so virtuous, why we should strive to be the most avid practitioners of a Tawheed. And we should be afraid if it's opposite. Then he says, what? Now you have to call to this. If you've understood this, now you have to what? You have to call to this. And now the Imam is going to support this, the fact that this is where we should start, and this is where our focus should be. He's going to support this with 3 proof texts. ثلاثة نصوص. The first one is an ayah, and the other 2 are a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the first proof text is the ayah from Surah Yusuf, the 12th chapter of the Quran, verse number 108. And that's the verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي وَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. He says, say, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the people, this is my way. I invite unto Allah, meaning I invite to the oneness of Allah. I call to Allah, ala basira. And we're going to talk about what that means. I do this, and whosoever follows me does so as well. And glory be to Allah. Glorified is Allah the Exalted, and I am not of the polytheists. So let's look at that verse more closely and what it tells us and how it proves the point of the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala. So first thing it starts and it says, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي, say, this is my path. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling His messenger to attribute this path to Himself. And basically, that lets us know that there is something called the path of Allah's messenger. By extension, there's something called what? The path which opposes Allah's messenger, or is in opposition to that path. The second thing, the path of Allah's messenger is one path. قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي, say, this is my path, one path. By necessity, number 3, the path of Allah's messenger is distinct from other paths. It what? It is set apart from the other paths. It has a distinguishing quality by which it can be what? Recognized and distinguished from other paths. The paths which are what? In opposition to it. So what is this distinguishing characteristic? Allah tells us, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ. I call to what? To Allah. This is what distinguishes the path of Allah's Messenger more than anything else. It is the single most distinguishing characteristic of the path of Allah's Messenger. So that doesn't mean that it's the only distinguishing characteristic, but it's the single most distinguishing characteristic. Why? Because if there was something more distinguishing, Allah would have what? Would have mentioned it instead. قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي. What distinguishes it? What makes it your path? Sets it apart from the other paths? أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ. I call to Allah. So the single most distinguishing characteristic of the Prophet's path is what? At-Tawheed. Monotheism. It is a strictly monotheistic faith or path. I call to Allah means what? I don't call to anyone or anything else. My call is a God-centered call. I call to follow Allah's way, and I call for Allah's sake. You guys see that? I don't call to something else. And when I call to Allah, I don't call for what? For someone else's sake. Because a person can call to Allah, but be doing it for what? For some other motive. Is that not so? Couldn't a person do something religious, but do it with a motive other than to please Allah? Couldn't that happen? Didn't the Prophet ﷺ talk about that? Talk about people? Didn't Allah talk about them in the Quran? Right? He talked about the people who, how does the ayah go? وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالَى يُرَاءُونَ النَّاسِ. And if they stand to pray, they stand lazily, listlessly. يُرَاءُونَ النَّاسِ. Only to what? Only to impress others, only to give people the impression that they're believers. There are people who will do a religious deed, but do it for what? For other than Allah's sake. And so when Allah says, I call to Allah, it means I call to Allah. I don't call to Jesus, I don't call to Buddha, I don't call to some other deity. And when I call to Allah, I'm calling for what? For His sake. I'm not calling to what? To impress the people. I'm not calling to create a following for myself. I'm calling for what? I'm calling for His sake. Then He says, ala basira. Another distinguishing characteristic of the Prophet's path, ala basira. What does basira mean? It means, according to the scholars, it means al-ilm al-nafi' wal-fahm al-sahih. It means sound knowledge and correct understanding. This indicates that before a person can call to Allah, before he can serve as an ambassador to Islam, he has to have what? He or she has to have what? They have to have knowledge, right? And the primary knowledge they have to have is the knowledge of what? At-Tawheed. But before a person can say, I'm going to call to Allah, I'm going to represent Islam, I'm going to be an ambassador to Islam, I'm going to invite people to the way of Allah, they have to have what? Knowledge. So what is Allah saying by necessity? He's saying that an ignorant person cannot do what? Cannot give da'wah. Cannot open their mouth and start calling people to what? To Islam. And if they insist on doing so, because some people do, some people insist, despite their ignorance, to do what? To call to Allah, to prop themselves up and promote themselves and present themselves as callers to Allah. If they do this, they have to do so with the understanding that they're opposing what? The path of Allah's Messenger. قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي. Say, oh Muhammad, this is my path. What distinguishes it? أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ. I call to Allah. عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ. With sound knowledge. I don't call to Allah based upon what? Ignorance. I remember early on when I first became Muslim, there was a particular group that would go around, they would do what they would call da'wah. And they would come to the masjid, and they would go around the city and they would invite other people. They might meet people who were non-Muslims. Those people might convert to Islam, or they would meet people, call them, go to their houses, pull them out of the houses and bring them to the mosque for a talk. And the person they bring to the mosque would say, I'm a simple person. I'm Muslim by heritage. I'm a heritage Muslim, but I don't really practice much. I don't know much. They would bring those people to the mosque, or bring a person who just converted to Islam, bring them to the mosque, and then they would say, brother, will you come and give us the talk? This person admittedly knows what? Knows nothing about Islam. That person will even shy away. and say, I really shouldn't be talking to people. I don't know anything about Islam. They would say, no, just speak what? Speak from the heart, brother. Speak from the heart. And that person would get up and say things. And I remember one instance, a brother said, he got up and he was going to give one of those talks, fairly new Muslim. And he said, I just feel the spirit of this faith. And I feel that, I feel the spirit of God. I feel the spirit of God in me. I feel the spirit of God around me. The spirit of God. What do you think about that? Does God have a spirit? God's the creator of what? The spirits. You guys see that? And he didn't know any better. That's how he felt. And they told him to speak from what? Speak from the heart. Now suppose there was somebody in the audience who heard that and didn't really realize this person doesn't really know much. They might go from that, take from that there's something called what? The Spirit of God. And you can what? You can feel it. And I need to spend the rest of my lifetime to what? Feel what that guy felt. You guys see that? So the point I'm trying to make is that we have to understand that knowledge is a necessity when we're calling to Allah, and it's also one of the distinguishing characteristics of what? Of those who follow the path of Allah's Messenger. And what knowledge do we have to have, first and foremost? Specifically the knowledge of what? At-Tawheed, like Hamza said. That's the main knowledge we have to have, because Allah says, Ad'u ilallah, I call to Allah. Meaning I call to the oneness of Allah with knowledge of what that oneness of Allah means, what it entails, what it consists of. And also, there's certain general knowledge that we have to have. If you're going to call to Allah, you're going to invite someone to Islam, there's certain general knowledge you have to have. And that general knowledge, the scholars of Islam have mentioned it as basically three knowledges, if you will. The first one, al-ilmu bid-da'wah. You have to know what you're calling to, right? You have to know what you're calling to. Al-ilmu bid-da'wah, right? I'm sorry, al-ilmu bima yad'u ilay. The knowledge of what? Of what you call to. So for example, let's say you introduce someone to Islam. You talk to them about the oneness of Allah. They accept Islam. And now you're going to call them to what? As-salat. Well, in order to call them to salat, you have to know what? Know something about a-salat, right? You can't be a person who, I really don't know salat. I still read my prayers in English. And I'm not really sure if I do my wudu correctly or not, right? You wouldn't be the person who should be what? Teaching someone the salat. So al-ilmu bima yad'u ilay. The second knowledge is al-ilmu bi kayfiyat ad-da'wah. The knowledge of how to call, the prescribed method of calling. That there's an acceptable way to call people, there's an unacceptable way. You have to know what? Know the difference and make sure you're calling them, inviting them in the prescribed method or the prescribed way. And last but not least, al-ilmu bihal al-mad'u. Al-ilmu bihal al-mad'u. The knowledge of whom one calls and the approach most effective to call someone of that persuasion. So let me ask you. You have, for example, an atheist. You have an agnostic. You have someone who is Christian, but they're Protestant. You have somebody who's Christian, but they're Catholic. You have somebody who's Jewish. Do you think you can call them all the same? You invite them all to the way of Allah the same way? No, each one of them is going to what? Going to require a certain type of approach. So you have to have some knowledge of who you're dealing with so you can what? So that you can approach them the right way. So these are the three knowledges that we should have specifically. But generally, if we're going to, the knowledges we should have generally, but specifically when we're calling people to Allah, the number one thing we have to have knowledge of is what? At-Tawheed. Because that knowledge alone is sufficient. Why? Because if they know At-Tawheed, they know they can go to paradise. طيب. Then it says, أنا ومن اتبعني. I do this, and so do those who follow me. And this is an allusion to the two conditions for the acceptability of da'wah specifically and acts of worship in general. So he says, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ. I call to what? To Allah, the oneness of Allah. So that's what? Al-Ikhlas. That's the first condition for our da'wah to be accepted and our deeds in general to be accepted. Then he said, أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي. I do this and so do those who what? Who follow me. This is what? The second condition, al-mutaba'ah. We're supposed to do what? follow the footsteps of the messenger, not invent a religion separate from that of the messenger and then call it what? The messenger's way, or call it Islam. And so basically what the Prophet is teaching us Allah is teaching us in a roundabout way is something that he said more specifically and more directly in other places in the Quran, and the Prophet has definitely pointed to it in his Sunnah. And that is that for our deeds in general and our da'wah specifically to be accepted, we have to fulfill two conditions. We have to check two boxes. One is al-ikhlas. We have to have al-ikhlas. We have to do it for Allah's sake. And number two, we have to do it according to what? The Prophet's way. And this is important because a lot of people, when they do da'wah, they invent ways of giving da'wah. So nowadays, for example, you have people who give da'wah by rapping, right? Muslim rappers, and they give da'wah by rapping. And they'll go to these big venues and they'll go up to people and they'll start doing whatever they do and saying the verses that they say, right? And they think that, this is a way that will bring people to Islam in an era in which, hip hop and rap and these types of things are very popular. We can employ these popular, cultural things to what? To bring people to Islam. And so basically what they're doing is what? They're innovating ways of inviting people to Islam instead of following what? The way of the Prophet ﷺ. And one of the ways that is very effective, has always been effective and will continue to be effective until the end of time, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, is by our example. By our example and following the Islamic model and showing the people that we have something that they should want. The sad thing for us as Muslims is what we do is we imitate the non-Muslims and we package our da'wah in the form of what? Something that is specific to them or to their culture. What the message, the subliminal message that tells them is that I don't have anything to give. I don't have anything to give. I don't have anything to offer you that you don't already have. You guys see that? But if I just what? I practice my Islam. I present myself as a Muslim. I carry myself as a Muslim. I dress as a Muslim. I appear as a Muslim. I conduct my business with them as a Muslim. That's going to pique their interest. Oh, you're different. I notice that you don't eat the things we do. You don't say the things we say. I've never heard you curse. I notice you wear those outfits that you wear. They become intrigued. And then when your actions are coupled with your speech explaining why you do the things that you do, that draws them in because they start to say, hey, this person has something I don't have. But when you come to them and it's all that, right? It's like this person doesn't have anything to give. They're what? They're taking from me. They're bringing me something I already have. You guys see that? We think that we are, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَأَنْتُمْ أَعْلَمْ أَمِ اللَّهِ. Do you know better or does what? Does Allah? We actually think that we know better than Allah. How to give what? Da'wah. Present yourself as a Muslim. Be a Muslim. Stop copying the non-Muslims. Stop giving the impression that you have nothing to give. You're only bringing them something they already have. Rather what? Be you. Do you. And you'll be surprised how many people will what? Will start to what? Ask you and be intrigued by you and be interested in you. And then I'll give you an opportunity to what? To speak to them. And when you speak and you tell them these sensible things, Allah is one. He can't be three. Allah can't have been crucified on a cross. Because if he were killed, how would the universe run? Who would run the universe? Who would do these things? What would be the wisdom of it? Because he couldn't forgive? How is it that he can do everything, but he can't forgive? Who will stop him from forgiving? You make them what? You make them think. You say, yeah, that doesn't make sense, does it? The point I'm trying to make is that without belaboring the point, is that our da'wah to Allah and every other deed that we do has to be founded on two fundamental pillars. Al-Ikhlas, doing it for Allah's sake, wal-Mutaba'ah, following the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. طيب ثم بعد ذلك, the Imam, he mentions his second proof text to support a da'wah to إلى شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله. And that's the hadith of Ibn Abbas, wherein he narrates that he narrates the instructions that the Prophet ﷺ gave to Mu'adh when he was sending him to what? To Yemen. He told him, يا معاذ إنك تأتي قوما أهل كتاب فليكن أول ما تدعوهم إليه شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله فإن أطاعوا لك بذلك فأخبرهم أن الله قد فرض عليهم 5 صلوات في كل يوم وليلة فإنهم أطاعوا لك بذلك فأعلمهم أن الله قد فرض عليهم صدقة تؤخذ من أغنيائهم فترد على فقرائهم فإن أطاعوا لك بذلك فإياك وكرائم أموالهم. Then he said, واتقي دعوة المظلوم فإنه ليس بينه وبين الله فإنه ليس بينها وبين الله hijab. So in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he was going to send Mu'adh to Yemen, and before he sent him, he said, "Oh Mu'adh, you're going to go to some people from the people of the book. So let the first thing that you call them to be the shahada, and la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." In another version of the hadith, he said, call them to an yuwahidullah. Call them to single out Allah. And this second riwayah, it explains the meaning of what? Of the first riwayah. So when the Prophet said that they testify that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, he's saying the meaning is what? At-Tawheed. The meaning is what? Singling out Allah and making the sole object in everything which is specific to Him. Rububiyatihi, asma'ihi wa sifatihi, ibadatihi, or uluhiyatihi, etc. All these things which are specific to Allah, He should be what? Singled out in those things. Then he said, فَإِنْ أَطَاعُوا لَكَ بِذَلِكَ. If and only if they accept this, they embrace this, they accept it from you, then tell them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is obligated that they pray 5 times in each day and night. And if they accept this from you, only if they accept it, then tell them about what? As-zakat. And if they accept that from you, then then avoid taking the best of their wealth. Avoid taking the best of their wealth. When you take the zakat, don't take what? The best of what they have. And be aware of the supplication of the oppressed person, because there is no veil between the supplication of the oppressed person and Allah, meaning it's going to be accepted. So there are a few things, a few points that we can benefit from this hadith as it relates to the da'wah ila Tawheed and some other points in general. First of all, we see in the hadith the obligation to call to a Tawheed. It's an obligation, it's not an option. Because what? He commanded, Amr. He commanded him, he said, فَلْيَكُنْ أَوَّلْ مَا تَدْعُوهُمْ لَيْهِ. Let the first thing, Lam al-Amr, let the first thing you call them to be a Tawheed. That teaches us, number 2, that we should prioritize it and make it the first element of our call to Allah. So we don't start by talking about all these other fringe things, and that doesn't negate their importance or significance. But if you talk about all those things and the person says, yeah, I accept all those things, but they don't accept a Tawheed, you've gotten nowhere. And so we prioritize what? A Tawheed. To the point, number 3, that he gave it precedence over 2 of the most important pillars of Islam. What are those? As-Salah wa Zakat. Have you ever, seldom do you read in the Quran, Salat mentioned without what? As-Zakat. They're supposed to go hand in hand, they're critically important, and they're the 2nd and 3rd pillars of Islam after the Shahada, right? But notice he told them, before you even tell them about these most important acts of worship, critical acts of worship, tell them about what? At-Tawheed. And don't even tell them about these other critically important acts of worship, one of which is the first one you're going to be asked about when you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment. Before you tell them about any of that, make sure they understand what? At-Tawheed. Then, in one of the wordings, he said, أَن يُوَحِدُ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى, that they single out Allah. And that's in this way the Prophet has explained the meaning of a Shahada. It means that we're supposed to single out Allah in something. And that something is definitely something that the people to whom Mu'adh is being sent, they don't single Allah out in. Now, do the Christians believe that God is the creator of the heavens and the earth? Absolutely. They believe in his rububiyyah. They believe in something called heaven and hell. They believe in the day of judgment. They believe in God's what? Lordship. Do they believe in his names and attributes? Yeah, for the most part. Right? They call him merciful. They call him benevolent. They call him loving. Right? They believe in these names and attributes. But what is the area of singling out Allah, or the category of singling out Allah that they don't want? They don't observe. In terms of what? Worship. In terms of which? Deifying him and deifying him alone. So certainly when he told them that you're going to them and you should tell them أَن يُوَحِّدُ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى, that they should single out Allah, he must have been telling him, single him out in something which they don't single him out in. Which means what? In worship. So the Prophet is explaining what he means when he says Shahadati la ilaha illallah. It's not singling out Allah or saying that there's no Lord besides Allah. There's no benevolent one besides Allah. There's no one who creates besides Allah. No, single him out in what? In worship. Because this is where they're failing. This is where they fall short. This is where they've deviated, right? ثم بعد ذلك, the people of the book. Notice too, he called them what? Ahl Kitab. The people of the book. So, these people to whom Mu'adh is being sent, they follow a religion, although they've received a book. The religion that they follow, which is supposed to be based upon that book, has been altered and perverted. They follow a religion which is what? Dinu muharraf. They follow a religion is what? That's gone astray. It strayed from what? The path that it was on when it was revealed to them, when the book was revealed to them. Now, that perversion has many forms, right? For example, their worship is perverted. And we see this. When we read or we're told about the narrations of how Jesus prayed in the Bible, it involved what? It involved prostrating. Prostration was a part of his prayer. Is that not so? And it did not involve sitting what? In a pew. It didn't. Right? This was something foreign to what? His religion and the religion of the people to whom he was sent. But now if you go to a Christian church and you look at how they worship, their worship, what? Is in pews, and there's no what? There's no prostration. There's no prayer in the way that we know that Jesus. So they had these different perversions. One of them is just the way that they worship. There's a lot of what? Clapping and singing, make a joyful noise, right? These are not things that we find in the tradition of Isa alayhi salam, right? So you see these perversions in their acts of worship. But the greatest perversion is what? Their perversion from at-Tawheed. They're deviating from what? At-Tawheed. So they have many perversions, but the primary perversion, which is the point of emphasis for Mu'adh when he was sending him, was what? Their deviation from at-Tawheed. And that's why he told him, let the first thing you call them to be what? Is at-Tawheed, which means that they had, the Prophet is saying in a roundabout way, they've deviated from at-Tawheed. They haven't just deviated in terms of prayer. They haven't deviated just in terms of what halal and haram, what they legalize and what they prohibit. They've deviated in what? At-Tawheed, and that's what you should make your focus. That's where you should start, because they've deviated in this. They're not people of what? At-Tawheed. So it's wrong for Muslims to say that the religions of the religions nowadays, the current versions of Christianity and Judaism are what? They're all Abrahamic faiths, they're all divinely revealed religions, and they're all paths to paradise. No, the Prophet is saying in a roundabout way, they're not paths to paradise. They've what? They veered away from the straight path that they were upon when these books were revealed to them and their prophets came to them. But despite those deviations, despite the fact that they even deviated in what? The most important thing, which is at-Tawheed, the Prophet still called them what? The people of the book. What that tells us is that despite their deviation, far from the path of monotheism, they remain people of what? Scripture with a special what? A special status. And they enjoy certain what? Certain privileges. Because of what? Because of that status, because they were people who received a book. They follow a religion which at one point was a divinely revealed religion. They have certain privileges that other people don't have. So if the Muslims were to fight them and they were to defeat them, they would have the option. to continue practicing their religion under the authority of Islam and pay what? Al-Jizya. Also, their women can be married by what? By Muslim men. And their daba'ih, their slaughtered meats can be what? Can be consumed. Right? So they have these certain privileges despite the fact that they've deviated from what? At-Tawheed. This is important because nowadays we have these heated discussions about whether or not the people of the book of today, whether we can marry them or not, whether we can eat their slaughtered meats. And I'm not talking about the meat that they hit over the head. I'm talking about the meat that they shoot in the head. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if they actually what? Slaughter it and let it bleed out. Can we eat that or not? If it was done by the hand of a Christian or a Jew, can we eat that or not? There's debate about that because people will say they are not the same people of the book of the Prophet's time. But the Prophet, in a roundabout way, is acknowledging that what? They've deviated from the most important thing, but they're still what? People of the book. They still enjoy what? These privileges. Last but not least, the Imam, he closes his istidlal, or the text with which he supports his assertion that the number one thing we need to call to is the shahada, with the hadith of Sahl ibn Sa'd. And it's a little bit of a long hadith, and we want to get to the commentary and leave time for some discussion. And so we'll suffice ourselves with the English. He says, on the day of Khaybar, Allah's Messenger ﷺ asserted, tomorrow I shall indeed give the flag to a person who loves Allah and His Messenger and who is loved by Allah and His Messenger. And when the Prophet says I'm going to give the flag, it means what? I'm going to appoint him as the general of the army. I'm going to put him in charge of what? Of the army. He's going to lead the army into battle. He says, Allah will grant victory. يَفْتَحُ اللَّهُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ. Allah will grant victory under his leadership. So now there's two things here. One, the Prophet is mentioning the virtue of the person to whom he's going to give the flag. What's the virtue he mentioned? What's the virtue? Not only that, because inshallah we all love Allah, right? Ahsant, that Allah what? Loves him. Whoever I'm going to give the flag to, he can be certain, and you all can be certain that Allah loves him. Now imagine if that was us. We will be fighting for that. We will be wrestling for that. We're like, elbowing this guy, trying to get to the flag. Because I want to be the person, everybody says they love Allah. I want to be the person who I can be certain that Allah loves me. You guys see that? That's a big time virtue. Then he said, يَفْتَحُ اللَّهُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ. Allah is going to give victory under his leadership. This is what? Min alam an-nubuwah. A sign of the Prophet being really the Prophet of Allah. Because he's predicting that what? These people are going to get victory. And so if they get victory, it means what? He's definitely the Prophet of Allah, the Messenger of Allah. Because how could he know that unless he was what? It was revealed to him. He says, the people spent the night absorbed in discussing as to whom might the flag be given. I don't like that translation. Basically, they spent the night hoping that what? That it would be them. They spent the night hoping that it would be them. In the morning, they came eagerly to Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Each of them hoping to be given the flag. They came what? Wanting to be in the first row. He would see them, right? They did whatever they could do within their power. Maybe they spent the night praying for it, thinking about it. What virtue, what is it that could make me one of the people? And then they came early. Maybe they wore something special so they would stick out. They did what they could do to be from the people who would be given that. But the Prophet ﷺ, he inspected the ranks and he didn't see the person he wanted to give the flag to. So he said, Aina Ali ibn Abi Talib. He said, where is Ali ibn Abi Talib? And he didn't see him amongst the ranks. They said, he is suffering from an eye ailment. He didn't come because he's ill, suffering from an ailment in his eye. So the Prophet insisted that he be what? He be summoned. And so they sent for him and he was brought. And the Prophet ﷺ, he spat in his eye and he made prayers for him. And immediately he was what? He was cured. Another sign of what? An-nubuwah. Another sign of what? His prophethood, the genuineness of his prophethood. So then he said, He gave him the flag. And then he said, Unfud ala rislik. He said, advance with ease and gentleness until you arrive in their midst, right? Then call them to Allah, or call them to Islam, and inform them. He said, ثم ادعوهم إلى الإسلام وأخبرهم بما يجب عليهم من حق الله تعالى فيه. He said, call them to Islam and inform them of their duties, the right of Allah upon them in Islam, the right. حق الله تعالى فيه. فوالله لأن يهدي الله بك رجلا واحدا خير لك من حمر النعم. By Allah, if He may guide through you a single man to Islam, then it's better for you than the red camels. And so there's a few things in this hadith that are worth highlighting. So he said, "Ud'uhum ila al-Islam wa akhbirhum bima yajibu alayhim min haqqi Allah ta'ala fi." Invite them to Islam, clarifying what is obligatory upon them of Allah's right upon them therein. And so the right here refers to what? Haqqi Allah, the right of Allah. What is the right of Allah? At-Tawheed. Exactly, that you worship Him alone. Because He said in the hadith of Mu'adh, He said, أَتَدْرِي مَا حَقُّ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْعِبَادِ. He said, do you know what the right of Allah is upon His slaves? He said, أَن يَعْبُدُوهُ وَلَا يُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا, that they worship Him and do not associate any partners with Him. And one hadith will explain what? The other. So He told Ali, when you go to them, call them to Islam. And He explained to him, what does that mean, O Rasulullah? Do I tell them about Salat? Do I tell them about Zakat? He said, no. He said, وَأَخْبِرْهُمْ بِمَا يَجِبُ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنْ حَقِّ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فِي. Call them to what? At-Tawheed. Call them to the oneness of Allah. Told Ali the same thing, right? And then another benefit that we get from this hadith that really sticks out is you just see how the companions, whenever there was a virtue mentioned, whenever there was something virtuous, meritorious, an indication that they would be closer to Allah, from Ahl al-Jannah, whatever it was, they were always keen to what? They were keen to what? To seize it, right? And you notice this because he said, فَكُلُّهُمْ, how does the hadith go? I think it's يَدُوكُونَ لَيْلَتَهُمْ يَرْجُونَ أَن يُعْطَاهَا. All of them spent the whole night hoping, longing that they would be what? That they would be given it. They would be given. They wanted that virtue of being what? From the people who Allah loves. And I think it was Omar, he said, there were plenty of times, there were plenty of expeditions where Omar participated. Plenty of opportunities for him to be what? Plenty of opportunities for him to be the leader. He said, مَا تَمَيْتُ الْعِمَارَةِ إِلَّا يَوْمَئِذٍ. He said that was the only time I wanted to be what? The leader. This is Umar al-Khattab. He said the only time I wanted to be in front was that time. Why? Not to be in front, not to be given the flag, but to be known, for it to be known that I was what? Loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, subhanallah. Then, what else? طيب, let's go to the Masail real quickly. طيب, so the Imam, he says, فيه مسائل, meaning فيه فوائد. He says there's some important and essentially very beneficial points that can be extracted from this chapter. So one of them we mentioned repeatedly was if we don't call to a Tawheed, we're not really following the path of Allah's Messenger when it comes to what? A da'wah. Number two, and that's clear from the verses, it is the way of the followers of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu to call the people to Allah. Number two, he says, stress upon sincerity of intention for many who supposedly call to truth merely call to themselves. So he said, Ad'u ila Allah, right? I call to Allah. I don't call to myself. I don't call to some iconic figure. I don't call to a school of thought like a madhab. But I call to what? I call to Allah. And then he said, because some people, they say they call to Allah, but in reality they call to themselves. Sometimes they call to themselves exclusively. It's what? Me, 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 me. They call to themselves. They actually literally call people to what? To be followers of them. Me, 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 right? Sometimes they mix between calling to Allah and calling to themselves, which means they prioritize themselves. They make it about themselves. And sometimes what they do is they cloak their calling to Allah they cloak their calling to themselves in a religious garment. And we see this a lot in people who form religious organizations. They form masajid and they form Islamic centers, whatever. And when you see it when you hear the word Islamic center, when you hear the word masjid, Islamic organization, you think houses of Allah. You think people who are what? Working for Allah. But they, in their own way, what they do is once they have that garment that covers and gives that guise, that veneer of sincerity, they'll end up what? Calling to themselves and calling to the way that suits their own personal whims, their own cultural whims, their own political views and aspirations. And so on the outside, it's what? The house of Allah. But on the inside, it's what? It's the center that I use to what? To advance my ideology, my political views, my cultural views and positions or stances, etc. He says, number 3, he says calling people to Allah with sure knowledge is obligatory. And this is important, and we stressed on it, and we won't belabor the point. But again, it's critically important for a person who's going to call to Allah to have knowledge. And there's certain essential religious knowledge that we have to have, just period. And that's proven by the hadith in which the Prophet said, the hadith of Anas collected by Ibn Majah, he said, طَلُبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ. Seeking knowledge is obligatory upon every Muslim. Every Muslim, there's some basic knowledge every Muslim has to know, right? And then there's requisite Islamic knowledge that we need to what? To give da'wah and to call others to the path of Allah. And Ibn Mas'ud, he used to say, Ya ayyuhan nas, man alima minkum shay'an falyaqul bihi. O people, whoever amongst you knows something, let him call to it. Let him invite to it. Let him say it. He has a right to what? Say what he knows. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَعْلَمْ, and he who does not know, فَلْيَقُلْ اللَّهُ أَعْلَمْ وَيَسْكُتْ. And he who does not know, then let him say Allah knows best and what? And be quiet. فَإِنَّهُ مِنْ الْعِلْمِ أَنْ يَقُولَ الرَّجُلُ فِيمَا لَا يَعْلَمْ اللَّهُ أَعْلَمْ. He said, because it is from knowledge that a person says regarding what he does not know, Allah knows best. Y'all see that? So it's critically important for us to avoid calling to Allah or speaking about something which we have no knowledge. Then after that, 4 and 5, he says, of the signs of the beauty of at-Tawheed is it being free of any blasphemy towards Allah. And also number 5, the ugliness of a shirk is that it vilifies Allah. And that's indicated by the statement of Allah in the ayah when he said that the people say, or the Prophet's followers say, Subhanallah, glory be to Allah. So basically what that means is that the first part of the ayah is saying that the people of Tawheed, what's special about them is that their call is free of denigrating Allah. Their call is free of it. And the people of a shirk, their call is that it is denigrating Allah, because what is it doing? It is equating Allah with what? With lesser beings. So you're denigrating Allah. You're bringing Allah down to what? To the level of what? Of His creation. And so the people of Tawheed, they say, Ad'u ilallah, I call to Allah, ala basira, upon sound knowledge. I don't say about Allah what I don't know, right? Wa subhanallah. And what? I glorify Allah from what? From bringing Him down to the level of lesser beings. Number 6, he says one of the most important issues of the chapter is that a Muslim must and should remain aloof from polytheists in order to not become like them, even if he does not himself commit a shirk. And this is important too, that we should avoid and minimize our contact with them in order not to be influenced by them. And this is important because we live in a society where we're surrounded by them. And it becomes easy for us to what? To even get to the point where we befriend them. We befriend them. We become more cozy with them than we become with Muslims, right? So a person has in his phone, hundreds of contacts, many of them Muslim, right? And he's looking for somebody to hang out with for lunch. He scrolls past all of those contacts and finds what? Some non-Muslim. Calls him up. Let's have lunch together. It's my treat. And goes out with that person and laughs and jokes with him. Then the next Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever. He goes on that list and skips past all the Muslims and hangs out with we choose to, get too close and too comfortable with the non-Muslims, and pretty soon we're being what? Influenced by them in our thoughts, in our moves, in our actions. You hang out with them, celebrating their holidays. Your thoughts about certain things become what? Influenced by them. So for example, a person who only hangs around Muslims and sits in classes where he learns about Islam, and if you ask him what's his opinion of going to the bank and getting a car loan or a mortgage with the bank, he would be like, no, I can't do that, man. Allah, there's too many verses about interest. In fact, Allah in the Quran declares war against the people who deal in interest or. But if he associates with the non-Muslims, they'll tell him, man, you got to buy a home, man. You have to. If you rent, you're throwing your money away. You're giving your money to somebody else. If you rent, you're never going to own anything. You'll never have what? Generational wealth, right? You'll start telling him the logic of it. Look, man, if you get a home and you budget your money right, you can double your payments and you can pay it off. Instead of 30 years, you can pay it off in 10 years or 12 years or 15 years. And that home will what? It'll double in its value. Right now, if you pay rent, you'll have nothing. But if you buy a home in 10 or 15 years, you'll have maybe 2 times what you had when you bought the home. You could buy another home. They start saying these things. And pretty soon the person gets what? Gets influenced. And all that he knows about what the religion says gets what? Gets pushed to the side. And all he thinks about is what? These logical arguments, or logical, at least to him, from a secular perspective. And he does what? He goes and does it. And so the point, this is an example, which is alluded to by the statement of the Prophet, which he said, Al-mar'u ala dini khalili, falyandur ahadukum man yukhalil. He said a person will follow the faith. He'll adopt the thinking of his closest companions, the people he hangs out with and laughs and jokes and chuckles with. So choose your friends wisely. Doesn't mean that you go to work and you're working in an environment with non-Muslims and you mad dog them. You don't say hello to them. You're not polite to them. You don't say good morning. It doesn't mean that. But it does mean there should be what? Exactly. There should be some type of, arm's length distance, that you keep them. And you don't bring them in too close, because they can influence you in ways you don't fully understand. You don't fully fathom until what? Until it's too late. And it's very important for us not to be arrogant. Many people become too arrogant, too conceited, overconfident, that I can hang around them and I won't be influenced by them. Okay? I won't be influenced. I got that. But the Prophet ﷺ talked about people who yusbihu mu'minan wa yumsi kafira. Or yumsi mu'minan wa yusbihu kafira yabi'u dinahu bi'ardin. Yabi'u dinahu bi'ardin min ad-dunya. He says there's going to be people, there's going to come a time where people will wake up Muslims and go to sleep. Wake up believers and go to sleep, disbelievers. Go to sleep believers and wake up disbelievers, selling their religion for a trifling price. How does that happen? Does that happen like overnight? Does it happen? There's a gradual process, and part of it is what? Being influenced gradually to the point that what? You're stepping away from religion and stepping toward what? Secularism, stepping towards atheism. Step by step, when you step away from religion. Why? Because Allah didn't put 2 hearts. So if you fill this heart with these thoughts and these ideas from non-Muslims, guess what's being pushed out? The deen. And we see this with some of our youth. So for example, youth who go to, for example, they go to public schools, non-Muslim schools, and their education is entirely secular. Now, sometimes parents are forced to put their kids in these types of schools, but they have to offset that somehow. And they have to have their finger on their pulse of where their kids' heads are at. But a lot of parents don't. They throw their kids into these public schools. They don't offset it. They don't have their finger on the pulse. They're not sitting at the dinner table and talking to them about what did you learn today? What are they telling you? What are they saying about this? What are they saying about that? And if they say something which is off base, they're not refuting it immediately. Just basically, washing that right out of their brains. They're not doing that. And so over time, these children start to develop the same ideas and the same perception, the same views of what? Of their non-Muslim classmates. To the point that I was in a community and I remember one of the young men who was very religious, very committed. He had a sister who would come back from college and they would have these heated debates, he said, about same-sex marriage. And he said his sister would say things like, there's nothing wrong with it. Love is love. And you can't say that there's anything wrong with it. You can't prove to me. Nothing you can tell me will tell me. I mean, convinced to that point. How does that happen? How does that happen? It happens from what? That constant contact to the point that Islam becomes secondary in terms of determining what they believe and how they think and how they behave. To the point that Islam gets put on trial. That what they say is truth until you prove it to be the opposite. And what Islam says is false until you can prove it to be true. You guys see that? So that's why we have to be careful. وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. I'm not from them doesn't just mean I'm not a polytheist. It means what? I don't associate with them. I don't over associate with them. ثم بعد ذلك 7, 8, and 12 are somewhat similar. 7, having Tawheed and calling towards it is the foremost obligation. We must first begin with Tawheed before everything else, even Salat. And number 12, the most important issues must be explained first. All of that proven by the hadith of Mu'adh, in which he said, فَلْيَكُنْ أَوَّلْ مَا تَدْعُوهُمْ إِلَيْهِ. That the first thing you call them to be. ثم بعد ذلك, let me see. Anything else that's really, really pertinent? Okay, let me come to this one. We'll close with this one. I really like this. Well, two of them. The first one is 21. Says the superiority of Ali. The actual Arabic says Fadlu Ali, the virtue of Ali, the merit, the excellence. It shouldn't say superior. Superior is a bad translation. Because it gives the impression that Ali is what? Here, and the others are what? Here. That's not true. That's not true. When the Prophet said, I'm going to give the flag to someone yuhibbullah wa rasulah, wa yuhibbuhu Allahu wa rasuluh. Someone who loves Allah and His Messenger and whom Allah and His Messenger love, the Prophet isn't saying he's the only one. Like it's something specific that he has that no one else has. Just mention that he has it. And certainly Abu Bakr also what? Had it. And Umar had it. And Uthman had it. And all three of them are better than Ali bil ijma', by agreement of what? Of the scholars. That doesn't take away from Ali and his virtue. He is very virtuous and he's the fourth caliph. Right? But the point is that we have to understand that Ali is not superior to Abu Bakr, not superior to Umar, not superior to Uthman. And so we have to understand that that's not a good translation. It should be Fadlu Aliyin, which means the virtue, the merit, the excellence. He was very virtuous, very excellent, very meritorious, right? But not better than what? Than his companions. The last one I want to mention is number 23. And I want you guys to help me with this one. An illustration of the faith in Qadhar. How does that hadith of Ali, or the hadith of Sahl ibn Sa'd about Ali, how does it show the faith in Al-Qadr? Remember that now.
They all wanted to be that guy.
But who was the guy?
Ali.
They all wanted it and they sought it. They sought it. They sought it out. He wasn't there. And it came to what? To him. And so basically the teaching in that, Jazakallah khair, Hamza, Jazakallah khair. So the teaching in that is that applying the appropriate means does not necessitate the achievement of the desired ends. Wujud as-sabab. La yalzam minhu wujud al-musabbab. That applying the means, having the means, doesn't mean that you'll reach what? The desired end. Rather, the results are the consequence of whose decree? Allah's decree. And there's no means, there's no wasila that can ensure that you're going to get what you want except Allah's will. That's the only one that can ensure it 100%. And why is this important? Because at the same time, we're told that it's not acceptable for us as Muslims, whenever we want something, not to apply or to employ the appropriate and legal means to the end. So for example, it's It's not acceptable for a Muslim to say, I want to have children and never get married. Right? Never get married, sit in his house and say, oh Allah, I want to have a child, I want to have a child, I want to have a child. Like that's going to fall from the sky. That's not acceptable in Islam. Right? That's not acceptable in Islam. So we're supposed to follow the means. He's supposed to get married. He's supposed to be intimate with his family. And then what? And then pray. Then tawakkal. Right? So how do we balance between this and the fact that Ali didn't strive, he didn't do anything, and he got it? And the Imam is saying this is proof that we should believe in what? Al-Qadhar. The way that we reconcile that is that this has to happen from time to time. That some people have to take the aspirin and still have a headache. That has to happen. Now, 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10, you take the aspirin and what? You feel better. But isn't there times where you took the aspirin and it's like, man, it almost feels like it hurt worse now. Doesn't that happen? That has to happen. Just like in this case, the people who did what they were supposed to do. They did their due diligence and they didn't get it. And Ali got it. That has to happen from time to time so people don't depend on what? Depend on the means. Because they realize that the means don't guarantee the end. Right? Because if they always guarantee the end, if they always guarantee the end, every time you do the means, you get the end, people would forget about who? About Allah.
They think it's just
they would think that the means is actually bringing about what they want, and they would forget about mashiatullah, the will of Allah.
I did this. I made this happen.
Exactly. So it has to happen from time to time, and in this case, it happened in a way that was very what? It was very, for lack of a better word, in your face. You see that? Exactly. It's very in your face that what? At the end of the day, it's Allah that's going to bring about and going to determine who gets what. You guys see that? And so this is, subhanAllah, yes, subhanAllah, we have to apply the means. But we always have to have in the forefront of our mind, the means aren't going to bring, this medicine's not going to make my headache go away. It's what? Mashiatullah. Right? I'm going to take the courses. I'm going to apply for that promotion. I'm going to show up in my best suit. And I'm going to prepare and blow them away in the interview. But everything I've done is not going to bring about what? The result. What's going to bring about the result? Mashiatullah, which also tell us we should always try to be on what? We should always try to be in Allah's good graces. So we become worthy that He would what? He would favor us with whatever it is that we're seeking. And with that, brothers and sisters, we'll bring wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. With that, we'll bring today's session to a close unless there are any questions, comments, or critiques. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد. بارك الله فيكم. تفضل.
You mentioned that the people when Muhammad
اللهم صل على محمد.
to Yemen to tell people about the food, and that was the priority.
Hey.
And then after that, he started talking about the other things like the prayers and the zakat.
Hey.
So let's just say so if someone have the Tawheed, like they accepted the Tawheed, they observe it, they follow it, but they didn't follow the other things that in the Islam.
Mm-hmm.
What place they going to be in there? Like, so would that put them as believers? So if they observe Tawheed, but they don't observe the other aspects of Islam.
Well, I think that's going to depend on why they don't observe the other. Well, two things. One, it's going to depend on why they don't observe the other aspects. And two, it's going to depend on Allah's mercy. And these are, at least one of them, the latter of them, it's not something we can determine. We can't say definitively whether they're going to receive that or not. But the first one, some people, they may not do the things that they're supposed to do out of ignorance. They just simply don't know that they're supposed to do these things. And it's not proper to say, ma'loom min ad-din bil-darura. Everybody knows this. Any person who's Muslim has to know these things. No, there's actually some things that people who are Muslim, born to Islamic society, Muslim dominant country, they actually do not know. Right? It's not uncommon for women not to know what covering is. not know what hijab is, not know the conditions for acceptable dress. It's not uncommon. It's not uncommon for some people in some Muslim dominant countries to think that salat is not something you have to do, that you don't have to pray. They actually believe that. And so I say that to say that if a person was ignorant, that would be an excuse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. We're not going to punish anyone until we send them what? A messenger, until until they know what they're doing is wrong. A person might not do what they're supposed to do out of laziness, weak iman. And so these could all be excuses which would entitle them still to what? Allah's mercy. But some people, they don't do what they're supposed to do because they disbelieve in it, they belie it, they deny it, and they do so out of knowledge, not out of ignorance. And belying and denying is a type of what? Kufr, right? Kufr al-juhud, right? A person just what? Just totally what? Belies and denies something. Or kufr al-takdhib. You also have a person who ya'ba wa yastakbir. It's like, yeah, I know it's from Islam, but it's beneath me to do those things. That's a type of what? Arrogance, a type of haughtiness where a person believes that certain laws shouldn't apply to them. And so that's a type of disbelief. That's the disbelief of a shaitan. As Allah says, Aba wastakbar wa kana min al-kafirin. He refused out of haughty arrogance and thus became from the disbelievers. And so the question becomes, why does a person not do what they're supposed to do? And depending on the answer to that question, it would determine whether or not they might be potentially entitled to Allah's mercy. What we generally don't do is when we see someone not doing something they're supposed to do, we don't make a judgment. We generally don't do that. We reserve judgment. We leave the judgment to who? Allah. We'll judge the behavior. We won't judge the individual. And there are some exceptions. There's some exceptions that some of the scholars make. So for example, Tariq as-Salat, the one who doesn't pray. Some of the scholars will say that person what? Is a kafir. They will just declare him as a kafir, and they support that by some statements of the Prophet ﷺ and the posture of the companions themselves, right? Because Abdullah ibn Shaqiq, he said, "Ma kana ashabu Muhammadin sallallahu alaihi wasallam yarawna shay'an min ad-din tarkuhu kufrun illa tark as-salat." He said that there was not one single thing that the companions of Muhammad would consider the person who didn't do it from the disbelievers except one thing, and that was abandoning prayer. So some scholars make an exception and say if a person doesn't pray, they're a disbeliever. But generally speaking, beyond that, if a person doesn't do anything, we might say that behavior is kufr. But we wouldn't say the person is a kafir. We leave that to what? To Allah. But we would warn the person that they're what? Under the threat. Because we can't willfully just be monotheists and then willfully ignore everything else. Because the deen at its core is monotheism, but monotheism isn't the deen in its entirety. There is something called salat, there is something called zakat, there is something called not lying, not cheating, not stealing, not backbiting. You see, all these things are part of the deen as well.
So, if a person doesn't have Tawheed,
Yeah, if they didn't have Tawheed, it didn't matter what they did.
so is there like a place where if they have Tawheed but not do those things out of ignorance, it might void it? Like,
yeah, it could. It could. That's as I said. It's going to depend on Allah's mercy, whether or not Allah has mercy on that person, how Allah sees that person. These are things we can't know for certain. We can't know for certain. But yeah, that's 100% possible. Yeah. طيب, any other questions, comments, critiques? تفضل شيخ.
So when I first heard the story about the flag, one of the things I thought about was like the implications of making routine out of what you do, like you better yourself as a Muslim. And it appeared that a lot of the companions at that time were almost doing it solely because they wanted the flag. And I was just curious, like, on your opinion, I mean, do you feel like part of the reason they were not given the flag was because they were all kind of pushing themselves to be better that night solely to retrieve the flag?
No, because remember, at the heart of it, it wasn't the flag. It was what the flag would signify. That they were loved by Allah. And that's really what they wanted. And for a Muslim to strive and compete with his fellow Muslims for a virtue, not for a position, not for something worldly, but something immaterial, something otherworldly. That's something praiseworthy. Allah says in the Quran, وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. And in these types of things, these virtuous deeds, let the people who compete. So they were competing for what? For this virtue. So nothing wrong with that, because at the end of the day, they weren't competing for the flag. Even Umar, he said, مَا تَمِيتُ الْإِمَارَةِ إِلَّا يَوْمَئِذٍ. He said, I never wanted to be the leader except that day. Not because if that was the case, he would have wanted to be the leader the other days too. Or at least one of the other days. But this was the only time. Why? Because of the virtue that was attached to that. That if I'm the leader, if I'm given the flag, I don't care about the flag itself, but what it signifies. It means Allah loves me. And I want to be from Allah's beloved. Yeah, so that's what it was.
But actually, Allah loved them all because they won the battle.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question, but for him to single him out, because as we said, Ali wasn't the only one. Certainly Allah loves Abu Bakr, he loves Umar, he loves Uthman. But for him to single him out, that's something significant. That's something significant, and they wanted that. They wanted that virtue, to be singled out as being somebody who what? Who Allah loves.
They wanted confirmation.
Yeah, that confirmation, yeah. طيب, so we'll stop there. جزاكم الله خيرا. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.